One. Hello and welcome to the February edition of Coffee with the Pastors. I'm Pastor Daniel Hanson here today with Pastor Beverly Butler and Pastor Dan Gerrietts. We've got our favorite beverage with us on this cold, chilly winter day. We hope you'll grab your favorite beverage and join us for a conversation today about Trinity's life and mission. Happy February, everybody.
Happy February.
Same to you.
Now, February is one of those months in my world where the newness of the year has kind of worn off, and now we're kind of like we're plodding forward through winter. So in February, I like to kind of look ahead to greener pastures. To me, that's usually baseball season and gardening season. But I'm curious, what in these dog days of winter, what are you looking forward to today?
Well, I have a new baby coming in my family. It's my first cousin's grandchild to be born in April, and they're having a baby shower later this month, and I'm looking forward to going over to Decorah for the baby shower. This we haven't had a new baby since for about 5 years since the another cousin's grandchild was born. So fun to have a little one.
Nice.
That's exciting. Pastor Dan?
I'm looking forward to snow, which we're getting now, which is awesome. I love the upper Midwest for the seasons and the change of it all. And so it's been a little bit of a bummer this winter, especially January when it was really cold and yet really brown all over, just dead grass and barren trees. So it's really nice to have some snow. I'm excited for that. I'm not so excited to clear it, shovel it, that kind of stuff, but it is nice to see things covered again and to get to experience some real winter. But I think along those lines too, it's often this time of year is when we start to think about spring training for baseball too. So I mean, pitchers, catchers reported, so that's kind of exciting. Yeah, it's a good time for sports, I guess.
I'm weird. I look forward to when the Super Bowl is over because that means baseball season. It's here, right? And so I cheered as the clock hit zero on the Super Bowl because that means that baseball's time to take the driver's seat. So um, we'll see if I don't think I'll get my tickets to Jupiter, Florida this year to watch the Cardinals, but maybe just maybe if it snows too much, we'll get down there. But I'm looking forward to gardening season because this is about the time of year where I stare out at my backyard and the frozen dirt calls to me. Uh, and my first seed catalog came in for the year. I don't know if anybody else gets seed catalogs, but there's something about opening a seed catalog and you look and you're like, this could be in my garden. This could be in my backyard. But it just stares at you and you look out at the frozen tundra. So it's going to be a few months, but I am looking forward to when the snow melts and the ground thaws and it's time to throw those seeds in the ground and see new life grow again. So there's some good things to look forward to as we go through these dog days of winter. But I wanted to pose that question today because we are looking ahead at Trinity, looking towards our future. And our church council has been doing over the past year or several months some initiative work. And maybe throw it over to you, Pastor Dan. What are some ways that the council as a process is looking forward to Trinity's future and how we can be faithful to what God is calling us to do in this time and place?
Yeah, you bet. About a year ago, I think, the council was thinking about kind of where we'd been recently, getting through COVID, having almost completely wrapped up the T150 project, a massive remodeling and mission project for us, and just having this sense of like it's time to really think ahead. And having it's been a little while since we've done a strategic planning process of any type or a listening process. We did a bunch of that during the ramp up to the T150 project, but we really hadn't since then, about 2018 or so, I want to say. So with the help of an outside consultant, the council, as you said, for about the last 10, 11 months, has been doing some really intentional listening, what we call a strength, weakness, opportunity, threat, a SWOT process of really scanning our ministry and thinking about what are the things that God has really gifted us to do? What are some of the things that are maybe going to be challenges to us, either as a congregation or even as a denomination? And then thinking about where's God leading, where's God calling us. So we walked through this process for much of 2024. And then right here toward the latter part of 2024, identified 5 strategic initiatives that we really want to lean into as a congregation. And some of them are pretty focused, pretty specific, and clear, and some of them are pretty open-ended kinds of statements or even questions. One of them is really honestly just a question that we're asking of ourselves. And so I talked a little bit about these at annual meeting. We've talked about them a couple other places. The staff has been engaging them pretty hard since about November. Actually, our annual staff review process was really rooted in these, encouraging the staff to think about how they can plug their work this year into those initiatives. So we thought it'd be fun to talk about them, right, a little bit here, because they're the kind of thing that they're well suited for conversation like this, right? And that's kind of what we want to do at this point, is to get more people in the congregation talking and thinking about them.
Awesome. Well, I thought maybe I could read each one, and some of them we may kind of go through quickly because either a lot of work has already been done on them or they're pretty self-explanatory. Others, I think there's a lot of conversation that we could have about that. So we'll just maybe jump in. There are 5 initiatives. The first is to assign and create a technology oversight and support team for budget, equipment, upkeep, and expansion and visioning for our digital ministries. So that is one of the initiatives that already a lot has been done. So maybe Pastor Dan, real quick, you could just share what is some progress we've made in that initiative.
Yeah, so that's one of those simple, straightforward ones, right? That's a pretty clear objective. We recognized really probably for a couple of years now that the challenges of doing technical digital ministry well are never ending. Even with the live stream, right? We have some weeks where I think it goes really well and it's a great experience for people. And then we have weeks where something goes wrong in that long chain between what's happening in the room and how people receive it on their own devices. And so we really wanted to throw some resources and really structure at that challenge, that ongoing challenge and opportunity there. And so the council appointed a team of five folks that are going to help shepherd our digital ministry. So now when we receive feedback on the live stream, or we need to purchase a piece of equipment or something breaks, it's no longer coming to the pastors or to one of our office staff people. There's a group of people that are pretty gifted and knowledgeable in this kind of area that are going to help improve those things, resolve those issues, and think about in the future how we can expand digital ministry in the church. Things like this. This is digital ministry, right? And so Danny Vogel on our team is helping lead that. We have probably about a dozen volunteers that help with the live stream of worship alone. It takes about 3 people at a time to run that well, between the PowerPoint and the sound and the video. And so that group has just met up for the first time here, and they are already helping kind of shepherd and lead that ministry. They call themselves the DMAT, the Digital Ministry Advisory Team, and I think they even have stickers. So,
Ooh,
yeah,
then they're really
there might be
official. If you have
T-shirts
stickers,
coming.
you're very official.
Yes, they have a logo and they have merch. So,
Well, I can say for myself, one thing I've noticed before this team was developed and before Danny got here, there was a lot of time where pastors were spending between services setting up mics, and at least I can say how grateful I am, and that's time for me to either prepare other things or to be connecting with people, right? Which is, I think, or at least I can say my gift set is, and it's not on the computer back there. I know how it works a little bit, but right, how great that these folks are being equipped to carry that ministry and do it much better than I know I did.
oh, amen.
Good. Well, so lots has been done with that one. So I'd like to move to some of the other areas. The second initiative was to explore other revenue streams for ministry. So that might be kind of a new concept. So what's the need to explore other revenue streams?
Well, a lot of church experts these days are saying, and I think rightfully so, I mean, time and history is proving out that the model of financing ministry, especially in mainline churches in the U.S., for decades has been primarily through the offering plate, right? Through what we receive in charitable gifts and people's incredible generosity. And while that's going to continue to be a major driver, I mean, it's still for us, I mean, it's almost the entire budget comes from just what people give over the course of a year. We have a little bit in terms of investment stuff that produces some income, but not a very high percentage of the budget in actuality. It's pretty minimal. But the trends are, I mean, obviously, we can't expect that that model is going to continue as we see changes in engagement culturally with religion and even the way that people do charitable giving. So, a lot of faith organizations and really nonprofits in general are thinking about how else can ministry be funded? How else can mission receive those vital resources outside of people's charitable giving? And that opens up all kinds of thinking and possibility about what that could look like. So I'd be curious to know from the two of you, just as we kind of start that question, what does that spur for you? What kind of ideas or possibilities does that make you think about?
Well, I think of selling stuff. Not that I want to get into selling stuff myself, but we certainly do things like that. Not so much this church, but fundraiser dinners. We do dinners all the time, but they're free will come, free will offering, not necessarily for a particular fund, but just, to help offset the cost of the meal. But
Yeah, youth
yeah.
ministry, they've done that kind of thing forever, right? Of selling pies or,
Mm-hmm.
selling fundraiser kind of things.
Mm-hmm.
In some ways, I think even about the bazaar in that way, right? I mean, that's an event where they sell a lot of different things, but it's all money that's used pretty much for ministry or keeping up the kitchen. So yeah.
Yeah, I think of, I mean, in my previous call, we had partnerships with some other congregations. So there was some staff sharing where the some churches shared staff. They shared me, frankly, was what the arrangement was. And so there was some pastoral. The churches couldn't afford a pastor, couldn't find one because there were none available. And so I was already going to the nursing home, so did some nursing home visits for them. I was already going to the hospital, so went to the hospital to visit folks. Was already doing worship on Sunday morning, so would drive out and do worship at another church. And so sometimes I think it could look like could staff be shared. I've also heard in other context it's building space. Is are there aspects of the building that are not being used or not being used very efficiently or effectively? Are there community partners with a like-minded mission that would rent space? I think we already do that some with Sugar Plum Preschool. Are there other opportunities to help? I know, especially other churches that are struggling to keep their building up, right? That can become a great strategy. So I I feel like as I've been to conferences, this is a big question that, as you noted, we're not the only people thinking about this question, but I'm amazed at people's creativity, right? Different contexts come up with different, because what might work really great in one area might not work at all in another area because of the needs of the community or what's available. But I think it's an interesting question to ask because as we've chatted some before, right? Sometimes the financial side limits can be a limit to what our outreach can be, and if we can push that ceiling higher, right? How much more ministry is possible? I think that's an exciting question.
Yeah, and it's good to not have to think about it when you're in crisis mode, right? I mean, like all of these are really you could say that probably about, but I think it's best to have these kind of conversations in ways that can be rooted in your values and in your mission, and not just reacting to a crisis, a financial crisis, which is going to, require huge cutbacks or that kind of thing. Because of the extraordinary generosity of this congregation, we are not in crisis, and yet it's just good to think about, like, I mean, the reality of large churches I learned a long time ago is the amount of ministry that you can do is often tied to the amount of resources that you have available, right? And I think that's just kind of a common sense sort of statement. But if you care about the ministry and the mission, then of course you always are thinking about ways of growing the resources, and not just financial resources, but time and talent resources too, right? That's your capacity to impact people with the good news of Jesus is always connected to that. So yeah, it's good to be thinking about these things now.
Well, I think
I
that
understand that people ask for Trinity merch.
Yeah.
I didn't know that was. really asking about, is there something they could buy, sweatshirt or something that would have Trinity on it?
Yeah, and while that's not going to probably be a huge fundraiser for us, I just think that's great for community too, right? To have people be proud of our community and want to show that and share that with others. But yeah, there's some work going on to create maybe a little merch corner with some Trinity stuff, and I think that's cool. You know, some churches, and I know a lot of our folks have visited churches where there's an entire bookstore when you come in. You know that you can buy resources that have been put together by people on staff. You know, books or curriculums and that kind of thing, along with coffee cups or devotional resources, things that feed people's faith life. And I don't know if that's in the plans for us, but I think there are ways that can be helpful too. To ministry. So we'll see.
Well, continuing that thread of resources, I think especially time and talent resources. The third initiative is recruiting and equipping lay leaders for key lay roles within the church. Um, and so I think that brings up a really important question of who is it that does ministry? Because sometimes in our imagination, I think it's, well, we have this great staff, right? We hire these people and they do ministry for us. And that's such a limited definition of what ministry is, right? Ministry is so much more than that. So I would toss out the question, who is it that does the ministry of Trinity, as a starting question to that, to why this is an important initiative.
Boy, it's not hard to find those folks though, with so much going on here, so many people pitching in. I think of the work in the kitchen. I don't know what day the kitchen is not busy with something. I went down there yesterday because there were a couple women there, and I'm thinking, it's Tuesday. Are they getting ready for Wednesday night live meal? No, they were making the communion bread for Sunday. Like, oh my goodness, yes, I love the bread. It's great. And now here they are making it right there. So there's just so much going on that would be behind the scenes, and unless you step behind the scenes and then you see how much happens to make things happen.
Yeah, we have a phenomenal staff and a staff who does so much. I mean, I think sometimes it's staggering to think about what our group of staff actually gets accomplished. But one of the things that I have really celebrated over the last number of years at Trinity are the ways that our people are owning ministry too, and even leading and organizing ministry. I think that is one super healthy and and good for the church's mission, but it's also fun, right? Because you get to see people using their gifts and finding it meaningful. Like even this as a staff, right? Sometimes we fret about things like the Wednesday night meal or funeral lunches. We see how much the people that are doing that ministry, how much work they put into it, and we're like, oh gosh, they might get tired or worn out, and sometimes people do. But there's a flip side to that a lot of times people are really having a good time and finding great meaning and connecting with each other and getting to do something meaningful for the sake of God's work, right? And I think that's the piece of this initiative that's really exciting. It's happening already. Things like in the last year, developing this really large care team of 30 to 40 people that are regularly visiting folks alongside and with staff. Things like our visitation or our greeter teams and our coffee servers and people who work on projects in the buildings and grounds and prayer shawl and there's just so many, right? That these are all ministries that if it were not for lay people leading them, I mean, they just wouldn't happen because we only have so much capacity as staff, right? So I think the more that we move into that, the healthier and stronger and really more appealing we become too, because I'm convinced most people these days, if they're a part of a church, it's because they want to be a part of a church.
Hmm.
It's not out of obligation generally, or the sense that it's just something you're supposed to do. It's because they genuinely feel connected to God. They want to be connected to other people, and they want to live out their faith in meaningful ways.
And that's exciting to think about, right? What that ceiling moves like considerably as more and more folks are equipped and given opportunities to live out their and share their gifts with others. Within that dynamic, there's a real dynamic of trained leaders in the church too, right? That there are not as many people coming out of seminary as there used to be. There is our baby boomer generation is retiring quickly, and that's creating a void in the system. Right now, we're fully staffed. That's wonderful, right? But we live in a world where things were not as certain in the future. So how does that play into equipping lay leadership at a time where we're not in crisis, looking for leaders to fill spots?
Again, I mean, I heard once, the larger a church gets, the more tempting it is for everybody to sort of just look to the staff to do ministry, right?
Hmm.
And I think that is something we always have to be aware of, particularly as in the context you just described, right? Where paid leaders, for a variety of reasons, may not be as readily available. It doesn't have to mean that ministry can't happen. And in some ways, I think we're finding it can be even more rewarding and more engaging for people when the staff are in the appropriate position, right? Maybe not always the ones on the front line doing ministry, but the ones helping identify leaders, equip them, train them, support them, walk alongside them in equipping other people, right? Doing that kind of multiplication of leadership. That to me is really the appropriate role of staff. And we've got some people under this initiative on our staff team that are already really working at this and kind of trying to shift the model a little bit. Becky Ellsberg, our parish nurse, is really working with some of her cabinets that she's related to for years and going, how can we, the elected leaders in these areas, really lead some of these ministries? And then when their term is up, hopefully hand them off to somebody else, right? And that I just think, again, is really exciting and is just going to make us a more robust congregation for whatever comes down the road. Beverly, you work with some of the care team folks. I mean, how have you seen that ministry be about equipping leaders to do ministry?
Well, I am just so impressed that so many people have stepped up to the call to serve. Those who, so a variety of capacities, they may visit in person to the person's home or where they're living in a nursing home or assisted living. They may visit, they may make a phone call. They may write a postcard. So all of these are contacts. The person being visited gets to say, would they like a visit? And would they like the visitor to bring them communion? Or would they prefer just a phone call? Or would they prefer a postcard? And it just, the whole variety of opportunities to serve to match with the needs of the person and the gifts of the person serving. We all have gifts. All of us have gifts. And so we're all called to use those gifts as we are led. And I'm just very impressed with that. So I do make some visits. I am not technically the visitation pastor. I did hear someone introduce me or mention to me to someone else, this is our visitation pastor. Well, not technically, because what we don't want to do is take the place of this wonderful ministry that's happening. And my part-time status doesn't allow me to be able to cover all those visits. But I enjoy getting acquainted. So I'm trying to little by little get acquainted with those who are shut in nursing homes, especially nursing homes, assisted livings. And then, as you say, it's a partnership with. So how can I support? But the ministry continues because it's happening by the folks in the church, in the pews, who are going out and serving. So if you who are listening to this today feel led to serve in some way, can you make a phone call? Would you like to write a postcard to someone every month? They do try to have a visit once a month or a phone call once a month or the postcard. So reach out to Becky Ellsberg, our parish nurse, and she will set you up with a person that would appreciate your support, your encouragement. It doesn't take long. Even the visits don't have to be long. Just to touch base and to see how the person's doing and to pray for them. It's a wonderful ministry. I'm just so pleased to be a part of a church that is so engaged in living out the call to ministry.
Well, thanks for being a great example of how this initiative is going to grow, which is by inviting, recruiting, identifying, equipping. Right? You just did it,
Yeah.
which is beautiful. Well done. That's it.
Yes.
Yep. That's it.
Yep, yep, yep. And you do get guidance in making in doing that piece of the work too. You're not just like, here's your name, go. You can,
Yeah.
Becky will talk to you about how it goes, or you can go with someone else, or and then there's appreciation times too during the year, which is really wonderful to gather all the care ministry people who are doing the work together and to appreciate them and to give them encouragement. So. Yeah, there's so much going on. Our Healing Touch team is made up of also of people who called in ministry and not just from Trinity. And that's, I was involved now for 9 years. I've been involved in that ministry. And wow, why? Because someone mentioned this was happening here and I wanted to get involved. So it's word of mouth, it's mentioning, what's happening. So our ministry goes out beyond our walls to people who have heard about or someone's mentioned, would you like to come to receive a healing touch session? This is how you go about it. This is what happens, and it's available to the community. So that's a team ministry that's even beyond our walls as far as people who are called by God to serve.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, there's two more initiatives, so I want to save a little time for those. So let's move on to number four, and this was our question. So this is probably the most open-ended of all the different initiatives. But our question was, how are people being fed at Trinity? And then we had worship, faith, and relationships, and that's a really big question, right? And
Enormous.
so, what? Sorry.
Enormous.
Enormous. Yeah. So, and it's almost a difficult question to even enter, right? Because, I mean, we could probably go around and say ourselves, we are fed spiritually in different ways. And maybe I'm just speaking for myself here. It's not like we could necessarily tailor our mission towards one particular way that's going to work for everybody. It's not like we can find the Swiss Army knife that's going to be perfect to do all these things. But I think there's an interesting question is, and how do we even go about asking this question with folks? And maybe it's taking a litmus test with oneself to say, what is it that feeds me spiritually? Is it community? Is it worship? Is it service? Is it some combination of each? Do I feel like I'm reaching that? Is that a problem of, if I'm not, is that a problem of, well, I'm not, participating in the things that are available, or that something isn't available that would feed me. But um, yeah, I don't know. How do you hear that question? Um, how are people being fed? Because we want people to be fed spiritually. Um,
It's a great question. Yeah, I mean, I think it is an enormous question. I hear it as an invitation, as you just said, for us to reflect individually, to reflect corporately, and to even think about, I think at a deeper level, what does it mean to be fed in our journey of faith? That's a question in and of itself, right? Is it just feeling entertained? Is it feeling like this is stuff we like? I mean, I think those are important things sometimes, but it's not always the way that we're fed. Sometimes we're fed by challenge or by having to serve, right? Or so I think it's a complicated question in a lot of ways, but I love the question. I love the idea of asking, what is it that's really feeding us? Are we doing what is helping people grow in faith and live that faith out in their daily life? So I think it's a question that we as worship leaders ask all the time because we're always trying to think about how is worship really engaging and feeding people? Is the word being proclaimed? Are the sacraments being shared in ways that help nurture people's faith? I think that's a being fed question. But even in the ways that we organize as church, right? Like, are we open to new possibilities of being church together for the sake of feeding people that aren't being fed, right? Um, and that could lead to all kinds of places. So.
yeah.
There's so much. Um, there's so many possibilities, and we're doing so many of them, and there's so many more as well. I think of this uh, Wild Church, you may have heard of. Wild Church is maybe relatively new sort of phenomenon where people gather, but they gather outdoors in nature and have a worship time together out there. A former place where I lived out east actually has a pastor who is the coordinator of a wild church center there. So, yeah, where's the hunger and how might we meet that? I meet so many people in the hospital, and I will ask often, "Do you have a church connection?" Hoping that if they do, then I can make that connection with their pastor if they would like, and that person can come visit them in the hospital. I can encourage them uh, in that area of their life. And I hear so many times no or haven't for a long time. And I can pray wherever I am. I don't have to go to church to pray, and I agree with them. You don't. So why do we go to church if we can connect God with God anywhere? And we're talking about how do we help one another enhance that connection, right? How do we open that channel even more broadly? We can hear a sermon certainly on the TV or digitally now. You don't have to go out. And we're grateful for those ministries, KCMR, people who are not able to get out, who just that's their companion. But what do we gain by being in fellowship with one another that can't um, be replaced by just praying on our own where we are? And we have many opportunities. I think about another way in which I connected to Trinity long before coming to work here, and that's through the twice a month centering prayer group, Mondays and Wednesdays mornings. No, excuse me, Monday mornings, first and third Mondays. And the study of scripture that's not a Bible study, but is simply receiving the word and how does it speak to us on the second and fourth Mondays of the month, Lectio Divina. Those places I connected to be spiritually fed. I was serving as a pastor, and when you're a pastor, you're busy doing the work of the church, and you're not necessarily connecting during that time in a way that can feed you. I mean, we do get fed through our worship, but that for me was wonderful, and those opportunities are also there open to community. How do we connect? Let people know. They see the information on the digital sign, and then they may just show up, or someone mentions that this is happening at Trinity, as it did for me, and I was like, oh, I might like to come and experience that. So um, there's so much that we can offer. And yes, do we wait for people to come in, or what ways can we go and meet them where they are? Um, Good questions.
Yeah, as I've sat with this question, I've taken it in my own mind in a slightly different direction as a question of not simple feeding, but spiritual wellness. Right. I think there's a direction where this question can lead where, well, Trinity needs to offer more programs, which may be the answer to that. But the more I thought about this question is it more helpful for us to emphasize an environment where people are self-reflecting on their own spiritual wellness?
Mhm.
And if we each did that, right, and as I've done that some of my own, like I've recognized where areas of my life where it's felt like God has been absent, or I've been longing for community, or I felt like, oh, I have these gifts, but they're not being used, right? And there's this discontent of not being able to use those. So I'm curious in what ways can we empower people to think about this question? It's not only what ways are you being fed here, but how's your spiritual life going? Right. And what's already going on that could support you in that wellness. And in what ways might you be called to maybe start something new, right? That it isn't about the staff pulling a rabbit out of the hat, that this is a new program that's now going to feed a bunch of people. But maybe that, someone now has a passion that, seven other people have in the congregation, right? And that's going to be a ministry that they pursue. Um, but I don't think that's going to happen if we suddenly have another program tomorrow that does that, right? There needs to be this internal awareness, right? That I'm longing to serve, right? I'm longing to be together. I'm longing to spend more time in God's word. If I'm aware of that, that motivates me to want to do that. Maybe that's to go back to the question. I notice the hunger, right? I notice that I haven't eaten in a while. I notice, so I don't know that I'm curious what is that, what that process could look like. What is it? Right. Life's busy, right? Sometimes it feels like it's a stretch to just pull off Sunday morning and get to worship on Sunday with the family, right? That in and of itself is a lot. But um, I'm suspicious if I'm seeing the world through my own lens, I'm suspicious there's some hungry souls out there. Um, and so how can we together, following Jesus, be fed in that?
And I think it recognizes too, right, that like that spiritual hunger is slightly different for people. I mean, there's places and ways that there's some commonality in that hunger, but there are definitely times where it's clear it's very different for different folks. And it may depend on the season of their life or the circumstances around them. And I think that's also one of the challenges and opportunities in this question of like, there will be things that will feed a small group of people, but in a very significant, powerful way. And the church should be about helping that happen, however that takes place. And then there are some things that are more shared and corporate, probably. I think about the way the rite of healing sort of evolved here at Trinity through the years. For years, we tried to do small little services after Saturday night once a month to help people experience a sense of God's healing and wholeness in their life. And we had a very committed group of small group of people that would come to those, but just really struggled to try to engage other folks in those types of things. And then we tried doing it in worship in a way that sort of made it okay for everybody to do it at once. And one of the powerful things out of that has been every time that we do it now, fifth Sundays of the month, fifth Sunday weekends, there are people in tears, and there are, as Bishop Jones, who used to be on our staff, says, men looking me in the eyes, when I do this, like that doesn't normally happen, but there's something about that it was finally the right way to help a larger number of people to feel fed, right? And I think, to your point, Pastor Daniel, I think it is hard sometimes to pull the rabbit out of the hat. But if we keep asking the question and really reflecting on it, it maybe helps us answer it better than if we just kind of keep doing what we're doing.
Mm. Yeah. Where's our soul hungry, right? Where is God calling us? Um, hmm. I'm excited by that question. I'm not sure I have any more grasp of it, but but that's a good question, right? Like one that you can't walk away from with a simple answer.
Yeah. How beautifully rabbinic, right?
Yeah, yeah.
A good question more than any good answers.
Well, that will certainly be an answer or a question that we want to pose to the congregation to hear feedback from, and in a moment we'll hear about a chance to hear some feedback. But before that, there is one initiative left, exploring partnership with other ministry sites, and in parentheses through worship, youth ministries, faith and wellness outreach, music ministries, etc. What are some ways that partnership can be faithful to our mission?
I think it's interesting that all three of us here have experience in partnership ministries between congregations or either other things. We've all served in multi-point parishes, right? We all know and have experienced firsthand the value of ministries or communities of faith working together. We've also probably all experienced the challenges of that, right? If we're honest, there are challenges in doing that work. I think it's interesting a congregation like Trinity has not really had the opportunity to reflect on that possibility too often, because we've often been kind of larger, self-sufficient, able to do kind of the things that we feel called to do. But we're in a context now, I think our council leadership really recognizes this, that with the leadership shortage that's already been mentioned, with the decline of engagement in organized religion that we've been talking about, that there are a lot of churches that have reached the precipice of whether or not they can remain vital, either because they can't call a pastor or resources are less than what they've needed, or they have a building that is just beyond the ability of that congregation to repair it. For all kinds of reasons, ministry sites across our synod and in our area, as all across the country, really are running up against that, and it's a precipice, because I think there's a point where if the ministry passes over that precipice, then it's a matter of looking to how it's going to end, how it's going to close, right? And so one of the things our council did with this initiative is to say, maybe it's time for us, even here at Trinity, to begin asking the question of how can we be partners with others in a way that helps all ministries flourish and gains life, right? And that's another very open-ended question, right? We don't know. There's lots of ways that could look, or that might look, but I don't get the sense the council really has a specific idea, other than we just want to start asking that question of some of our neighbors in ministry to see if we could be better together, do things better together than we can do separately.
I think we saw an example of that this summer going to the youth gathering where we traveled with St. James Lutheran, with Crossroads Parish and Rural Osage, and with a family from St. Paul and Hampton, where we were able to travel as a group of 35 instead of a group of 20 and a group of three and a group of four and a group of three. We were able to have that experience together, and it was in my opinion, a much richer experience, because not only did that allow us to do a little bit more in terms of some of the extracurricular things we did outside of the gathering, but also we got to build community with our siblings in Christ from other parishes, and that was at least a very rich experience for me. Of We don't just go to church with the people who are in our congregation, right? We go to church as the body of Christ. And I think that's the point of the whole gathering, right? You're gathering together as the whole church, and we got to do that in a small way. I think that was just a very small way that we did that, and we were able to both support and gain from that experience.
One of the models of ministry that's happening in a lot of places that have a large amount of rural area, like Iowa, is to think about how churches, by partnering together, can help adapt to new models of leadership, like we're talking about. In a lot of smaller congregations, it's going to be difficult to call a pastor because there aren't pastors to call, or because the finances aren't making that possible anymore. But there are new models of leadership where trained lay people are doing aspects of ministry, even that have been typically reserved for ordained people, preaching, visitation, funeral ministry, even. But one of the questions with that is, how do you help support and continue to equip those people to do that kind of work? Or if a pastor is called to a small parish, as we've all experienced, and you're the only pastor there, it can sometimes be difficult to go on vacation or come back from vacation, right? Somebody's died while you're away, and the family's waiting for you to return to do that funeral. And it just makes that whole experience of serving in those kinds of places in some ways more difficult. You don't have as good personal and professional boundaries, right? Because you need to be available for your people. So one of the questions kicking around is, how can partnerships of staff and lay people help congregations attract people themselves, right? That's an interesting question. And again, I don't know exactly what that looks like, but it does seem that there's some power. Even ministries that, like we have going on at Trinity, youth ministry you mentioned, but health ministries, visitation ministries, food ministries. We have people who have great knowledge and expertise, and it'd just be interesting to see if there are people in other congregations that have great knowledge and expertise like that, and what it would mean to get those folks together to talk about what they're doing and see how we could learn from each other.
Well, it sounds like there's going to be an opportunity for the congregation to engage some of these strategic initiatives. So that is coming up on a Wednesday night alive in a couple weeks. Is that right? On the 26th, do I have that right?
That's right. On the 26th, we're going to go through these kind of a little more depth. And one of the things that we're going to do at that session is to talk about what the staff is doing under these areas, and then really to create some more conversation among our people about how they can engage these initiatives, what it means for them, and which ones they're excited about or kind of feel drawn to. I think we are working in these months to kind of widen the conversation beyond just council and staff, right? To help everybody sort of be thinking about this, because a lot of them are, as you've been hearing, pretty open-ended and pretty big kind of question-based things. But there's definitely a sense, I think, among the council leadership, and I would say among the staff as well, that there's great possibilities and a great sense of being led right into these areas as we look to the future.
Well, that's exciting. That is, we are looking through the windshield, not the rearview mirror. And I read a great newsletter article about that. But yes, so challenges in the future for sure. But we have God's presence in it, and how important that we can face these from a position of strength, not crisis, to approach that. So come on the 26th, share some input. We would love to hear from you. And we'll continue the conversation there. Any other closing thoughts for the good of the cause today? Covered a lot of ground. Okay. Well, the good news is the next time Coffee with the Pastors will be aired, they will be playing spring training baseball. So if that is the shot of hope that you need in your life, I receive that joy today. But may God's blessings go with you today. Thanks for hanging out with us today. We look forward to connecting with you next time. Take care.